Good evening, beautiful woman. Welcome to Isaya's Inspiring Evenings, a podcast full of goddess series, witches' secrets, colors of women, and fairy seasons to integrate serenity, abundance, joy, and magic into your life. I am Isaya Bell, creatrix, magical pragmatic inspiration mentor, tech goddess teacher, and traveling priestess. And this podcast aims to accompany you for peaceful and inspiring evenings. Isaya's Inspiring Evenings has had various iterations and styles and is published irregularly. Subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice to be informed of the publication of each new episode. If you like this podcast, please support it by leaving stars, blue thumbs, and reviews on whatever platform you listen to me. In 2024, there are going to be 5 series in it, for now. All different, all aiming to inspire the audience, all telling stories, each complementing each other. One series, titled Women Lighting the Way, is about women's stories, centering around the past or future speakers from the various Women Lighting the Way Summit, adding to the virtual library of women's stories and providing a much-needed counterpoint to the many men's stories going around in our world of patriarchy. This is one of those episodes, and I'm happy to invite you to listen to the story of Ailish Keating, recorded in 2023, entitled Here and Now: How Being Present and Living in the Moment Expands Your Life. Enjoy!
Hi there, I'm Ailish, and I wanted to share a little bit about myself with you and my story and how I've discovered about being here and now and how being fully present will really expand our lives and make things go easier and better. So what is here and now even? What is that all about? The Power of Now, it's a book by Eckhart Tolle, is one of the best-selling personal development books of all time. And if you read through the comments in some of the books, if you read through the reviews, a lot of people are like, well, it's nice to have a story about it, but what does it mean to be here and now? How is that relevant to me? And tell me how to be here and now in life and in how we are right now in this world in general and how I've been for most of my life. We're either coming from a place of memory or we're coming from a place of inspiration. And when we're coming from a place of memory, right, status quo, how things currently are, we're being prompted by things from our past or things we're anticipating in our future, conversations we're about to have with people, places we're going to go, and we're projecting what's going to happen there, quite often unconsciously. We'll drive home from work and we won't even necessarily remember the drive home because we've been off in our head someplace else. That, for the most part, is coming from memory. When we're coming from inspiration, a place of inspiration, that's where there's no separation between who we're being and our connection to our higher selves. It truly is inspired action and inspired moments. And I want to share a little bit of my story, how I've come to understand this, see this, and know this from my experience, and maybe it will explain it a little bit more and how it's relevant to every single person. Because when we're coming from inspiration, we're coming from a place where we're being divinely guided from our higher selves, from divinity and all that is. And when we're coming from memory, we're coming from a place of limitation. And if the biggest gift that we can give to ourselves, from my perspective, is learning how to be here and now in the moment. Because in our moment of any moment in time is where all possibilities exist, right? Once we move into memory and once we move different places, then we're going a little bit off center. And we're quite a little bit off target. And we may miss out on something that was magical, that was waiting for us to happen because we were distracted and not aware and not available in that moment for divinity and that inspiration. So that's the point that I want to start from today with this story. So growing up, and a lot of this I understand now in hindsight because I can look back and then look forward and see, okay, this is how this all connected. This is how it all maps together. So growing up, I grew up in the west of Ireland. Grew up on a dairy farm, fifth and five children, and seven children, and the children were all very, very close together. So I had very little, individual space, own space. Everything was in the moment, actually, growing up on a farm like that, because there was always people around. There was work to do, or animals broke out, or you were playing. That was really life. So there was never any planning, never really any opportunity to get much outside of the moment of being in the place and being in who I was. And that all continued the whole way through school, went through the motions of school. I went to college. And in college, I had a couple of options. I chose the one where I would have the opportunity to travel. So I did hotel management, and I had the opportunity to travel. And in college, it was kind of interesting. It was a very, very different experience for me. All of a sudden, I became more externally aware than I ever was before. Up until that point in time, I was much more kind of in the moment internally, where I didn't really think about anything. And in college, all of a sudden, I was around a lot of other people, a lot more sophisticated, who would come from a lot of different backgrounds. And we were a very close bunch of people. But all of a sudden, I kind of, from that moment in time, for a good period of time, I got essentially moved out of my body a little bit, in terms of I was less grounded. I was very social, very flighty, very having a lot of fun, and very little time introspecting for the most part. Although I would still look for that, but I didn't know why. I would look for a moment where I was not around people, but very little introspection and more just kind of going through the motions of life. So what I now understand is going through the motions of life is when we fall into patterns, right? We fall into patterns because they're comfortable, convenient, and it's easy to move lots and lots of people collectively. But because we fall into patterns, quite often we fall out of our inner connection. We just go through the motions. So in college, a lot of time I was going through the motions. In college, then I had the opportunity in my last year, I could travel, and I ended up going to Guam, where I was working in a hotel. And in Guam was the first time in my life where I really, really experienced a synchronicity, right? I've noticed all of my synchronicities in life, and synchronicities, it's a little bit more than a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. Synchronicities are divinely guided moments that will show up every now and then in our life if we are available for them. So the nice thing about Guam was that I worked actually all the time, and work is one of these things that I enjoy doing. It was very natural for me to be working. When I work, I'm very present, right? I'm just doing what's in front of me. I'm not so much thinking of the future. So I'm quite present when I work. And in my work, I was working at a resort, and I was taking a walk on the beach, and there was an Australian family on the beach. I could tell they were Australian because I could tell their accent. And I was trying to avoid them on my way to get my sun break, and in the middle of my afternoon. I worked 6 days a week. I had one day off, and I was resident on the resort premises. So I had my lunch break, and I was, navigating, trying to get past them. And there was a voice in my head saying, Ailish, you should go and you should talk to these people. And I was like, okay, obligation out of, being a service-oriented person and being what's the word for it? Hotel management student, like, okay, I'll go talk to them because they're guests. So I go over and I said, hi, how's it going? How's you enjoying your stay? And as I said that, the husband said to me, where are you from? And at the other side, his wife said to him, oh, John, you should know where she's from. She sounds just like Sister Claire. So I ignore that. You see, I have an aunt who's in Australia. She was a nun. And I was on the island of Guam, and these were just 3 random people on the beach. And I'm saying in my head, Ailish, don't go there. Don't even ask. I mean, it's like Australia's a big place, 20 million people. And so I didn't ask. I just kind of ignored them. Talked for a few more minutes, and I walked off. But I was on my way back, and there was a part of me that was like, just go and talk to them. Just go and ask. So I walked over to them, and I was like, sorry, when I walked up here earlier, you said it sounded just like somebody. Who is that? And their comment was, oh, yes, you sound just like Sister Claire. And not me know who works at the entrance. And I was like, wow, that's my aunt. Her last name is Keating. They're like, yes. So as it turns out, my aunt was a friend of theirs, a personal friend of theirs, and she had taught their son, who was older than me, in school. And I was like, wow, this was the first real example I had of synchronicity and divine timing, that at least that I can recall. I was by myself. I'd put myself in a position where I was doing something a little bit different, and I had the ability and the capacity to respond. And I had a little voice in my head saying, just go over there and ask them, just go over and talk to them. So that was the first synchronicity of my life. I didn't really think very, very much of it, and I went back into life and work as we know it. I graduated college and I moved to New York. I knew I wanted to be in the States. I actually really, really wanted to not be in Ireland. So I had two friends in New York when I moved to New York City. One was a friend of mine from Cornell from college, and the other was a friend of mine from the college I went to in Paris. I got a scholarship and I'd been to both colleges after I graduated. And I've been working and living in the city for about a year. I found a job at 1345 Avenue of the Americas. Excuse me. And I'm at my job one day and I'm talking to my Italian friend. He's like, oh yes, we're going to be opening up a new restaurant. A friend of mine from college, the only person, one of the two people that I knew coming to the United States. His name was Marco. I said, Marco. I said, where's the new restaurant? He said, oh, it's at 1345 Avenue of the Americas. I'm like, wow, that's the building I work in. Wow, that's downstairs. You're opening up a restaurant downstairs in this building that I'm working in. That's amazing. Within the next month, I get a call from my friend in Cornell, who was the American that I knew. Oh, Ailish, I'm going to be working with the Macchionis at their new restaurant. I said, really? She said, I'm going to be working at Circo. I said, that's in the building that I'm working in. It's at 1345 Avenue of the Americas. So within 1 year of me arriving in New York City, which is a big place, the two only people that I knew were working in the same building as me. How that happened is like, it's one of these things which is impossible, right? But life, again, was just showing me that sometimes when we're moving out of our comfort zone, when we're going into different places and doing different things, life has synchronicities that can happen. That would not have happened if I had not moved, if I had not been willing to venture into territory that I was not, that I did not know the patterns, that I did not know what the outcome, but I was willing to move forward and see a path being built as I move forward. So life carried on. I fell into patterns again, work, travel, I moved jobs, life continued. And the next job I moved into was in investment banking. And actually I was down at Two World Financial Center. And I found it very, very challenging because I was sitting all day long. And as it turns out, I'm somebody who likes to move a lot. I find it quite hard to sit for extended periods of time unless I have had some, physical activity right before it. So I wasn't extremely happy. So the opportunity came after a period of time. The company I was working with shutting down. And I said, okay, please give me as much money as you can. And I want to go and open up my own business. And so they did, at least what was appropriate at the time. So I opened up a bar restaurant. And I opened it up with two friends of mine, one of whom was my boyfriend. One of the challenges is when we're very, very close to people, and often if you were in a situation where you're working in a very close relationship with, or a work experience with somebody who you're in a relationship with, you can end up becoming the same person. So kind of what happened as I was opening up this bar restaurant with my boyfriend at the time and another friend, we were spending so much time together that we're becoming the same person. We were losing our individuality. And so our relationship ended, but our friendship still existed. We just had, it just had run its course. So I was going to be moving out and moving into a place by myself. So what this had done for me was it got me out of my patterns and out of the kind of standard experience of things. And I was back in the world at large. I'd gone into Battery Park City. And I was sitting by, I picked up friends from keys from a friend's apartment. And she was out of the city at the time. She was going to be gone for about 2 or 3 months, and I was going to be able to stay there while I figured things out where I'd move to next. So I went and I picked up the keys, and I was sitting down looking at the water. Again, the same place I used to look at when I was working in investment banking. I was looking out at the water. And I was minding my own business, and a French guy comes along, and I smoked at the time, and he asked me for a light. And I knew he probably wanted, whatever, cigarette or something, but I wasn't giving it to at the time. I just gave him the light, what he asked for. I was kind of a little, feeling a little bit grudgy. And a few months later, he came back and he asked if he could sit down next to me. So I was like, sure, we could talk. So we started talking. And he was in from France, and he was an actual graffiti artist that's very well known in France. And he was trying to understand the city and where to put his next works of art. And I was like, listen, you should be out in Williamsburg. That's where everything's happening right now. That's where all the artists are. So we spent most of the next part of the day, and I was just went with him. We went to different parts. And later on that night, we were coming over the Williamsburg Bridge. And we're on the Williamsburg Bridge, and he's putting up his pieces on the bridge. And this guy is cycling by on a bicycle. And he calls out to him. He says, hey, you're the invader. You never called me. My name is Omar. This person had been in contact with the guy that I was with, and he'd never gotten back to him because he's anonymous. He's discreet. He doesn't show his face when he's putting his work up. And this guy happened to cycle over this bridge at it was around 10:30 at nighttime. I think it was in February. And the likelihood of that happening, impossible, right? So another synchronicity, which was really, really profound at the time of transition, showed me again, there's more to life than the life that we sometimes see in front of us. There are bigger and larger hands at play in our life and in our world. We don't always see them working for us. Sometimes we've got to move a little bit outside of our patterns or outside of our comfort zones so that the hand of divinity can play, right? And so here we were again. So what I realize is wherever I go, whenever I'm conscious or whenever I go unconscious, when I go unconscious, that means I'm not really, really being fully present. I slip into patterns. I slip into scenarios, and I slip into things where I'm not engaging on a real, true level of who I am with a space. It could be, doesn't matter if it's in the middle of a city, doesn't matter if it's in the middle of the woods, it doesn't matter where it is. So a few years after that, I was back in Ireland for summertime, and I was standing in the middle of a field. We had a dairy farm, so we would stack hay, and I was helping out. And I found myself in the middle of a field stacking bales. I can still remember exactly where I was standing. And the most profound peace came over me. It was like, and I was standing there, and I was like going, oh my gosh. Sorry, it's making me emotional about it. This is a peace that I've been looking for, but it's in a field 5 miles from where I grew up, stacking bales. What does this mean? Right? Here I have my life in another country. I'm working jobs. I'm doing my best to make progress in my life. And I discover my peace is in the middle of a field, stacking hay. Now, I didn't want to become a farmer. Right? But what it showed me was that when I'm fully present, I can be anywhere. And I can have the most profound connection to who I am and who I'm being. It was so amazing to me because it was so simple and it was right there. So the point being, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be complicated. So it wasn't the timing for me to move at that time, and I wasn't going to be moving back to Ireland. So my life continued along, as these things do. Back in the world that was, I realized that my energy at the time, I owned a bar restaurant, and I realized that a lot of my creative energy was really spent in this place. And I really decided, okay, it was time for me to do something else. So I sold that business and I moved along. Shortly after that, I was pregnant. My daughter was was 2, and I realized, okay, I can't, being in the city at that time wasn't going to work for me. I went from being a hustle to being a hassle, dealing with a 2-year-old in a, crowded city environment. It was around the time of the real estate crash. I was doing real estate at the time, and I had a house in Maine. So I decided I would go to Maine, move. My daughter preferred it there, and it was working for me at the time. I had the house there. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to move to Maine. And it was around this time where I was wondering, how exactly am I creating my life? I'm creating all of these things. I know I'm responsible for everything. I've been a student of personal development for quite a long time at this moment in time. And I was like, how am I creating what I'm creating? Okay, I'm either responsible for everything or I'm responsible for nothing. How do I create more of what I want and less of what I don't want to experience? And this moment, I'm a single mother, right? My daughter's young. So at that moment in time, right around then, I came across Ho'oponopono, self-identity through Ho'oponopono, and the book Zero Limits. And I started going to these conferences. And in these conferences, I had some amazing experiences, which I'm not going to get into now, but I'll save those stories for another time. But what it taught me was that every single experience and everything that comes in front of me is an opportunity to clear and release any shared memory with that experience. So I'm moving up to Maine. And the challenge with moving in Maine is where I moved to was quite rural and quite remote relative to where I'd lived most of my life. So it was like life put a big halt. It's like everything around me, all of my distractions from being in New York were gone. And here I'm at my house in Maine. I have to find work that is appropriate, matches my skill set, and I have a young child. I'm a single parent. In that space and time, I was able to do a lot of things. I decided I was going to go back working for a company. I found a job at a resort. The beauty of that was that it got me integrated in the area. The challenge with it was very, very seasonal, and it was going from highs and lows. Really, really busy, not so busy. It was an environment, in some ways it worked for me, and in many ways it didn't work for me. And I very much, yet again, threw myself into my work and kind of got out of my body a little bit. I needed a distraction. I still hadn't figured out fully what I was creating and how I was causing it. I still hadn't fully taken full responsibility for the life that I was choosing to create. Okay. Or I wasn't willing to make the decisions that I needed to make to move forward. So I'm in Maine. I've been there for about 7 years, working a lot. I was working 2 jobs at this moment in time. And all of a sudden, each time I would try to make progress in my life, I would trigger a health condition. I can now look at it in hindsight, but at the time, it was a matter of me working, putting all of my energy into work, less of my energy into me. So my energy all went on looking after my daughter, looking after work. And I would fit myself in the sliver in between. My being in the now, my being present, really didn't exist that much because I gave myself no space. My now was replaced by work and outside. What that did in the process was trigger health conditions. And in the triggering of the health conditions, not once, but twice. The first time I was triggered, I was trying to launch a project on the side. And I discovered a large lump in my breast when I was at home in Ireland. What that did for me, the first time that happened, it made me really, really conscious of all of the things and all of the feelings, all of the unresolved emotions that were going on in me. All of the frustrations and everything else that I could associate with the timing of when that appeared. So I got to work. I used the tools that I had. I used Ho'oponopono, used the release technique, And energetically, I cleared out a whole bunch of stuff. The lump shrank in size over the course of about 3 weeks, went from a golf ball down to a little marble. Didn't go completely, but I was confident that I would be able to keep moving it. Another 3 years passed, and the old patterns had pulled me in again, and I was working really, really hard. This time, when I went to address, I triggered my condition again. High stress, lots of work, lots of commitments, lots of obligations, everything but me, right? Also, I didn't value my own time. I didn't value as much as I needed to, sitting quietly, the restoration, the regeneration, the quiet time to process. It was all go, 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 go. Pretty much all the time. Because I get a lot of joy out of work. So that was where I sought to fill in the blank. Then COVID hit, and I got quite sick. I couldn't travel to New York where I was getting treatments. And within a very short period of time, I had to go into hospital. When I went in, they said I had 3 to 6 months to live. I was very weak. I could barely walk. I was quite sick. I was let go from my work, both jobs, and here I was. Now, the interesting thing is when you get sick, what sickness can do is that it causes anything that's not important to just fall away. And not only that, I couldn't fix it by working. I couldn't fix it by doing. I had to be. So it's like I was put on my back, flat on my back. And I'm like, okay, nothing I can do here. And I didn't have insurance. I didn't have all of the things that one would need, right, in those situations. I didn't have insurance because I worked 2 jobs part-time to make more money. And I couldn't afford, and because of that, I didn't qualify. I also couldn't afford, at that time where I was working, I couldn't afford private insurance, but I'd always been healthy. 6 months, 9 months earlier, I ran my fastest race so far for me for a half marathon. So I was doing pretty good. But I had 0 time for me. I wasn't being very present. I wasn't being very in the moment. So now here I am, on my back. What am I going to do? Well, people say when you have cancer, when somebody gets cancer, a question to ask is, what are you dying to get out of? And if I'm being really honest, and I'm going to be really honest, I really had wanted to move for quite a long time, but I didn't know how I could do it. I felt really stuck. Okay. I wanted my life to be moving forward, but I didn't know how to move it forward. And doing more of the same wasn't bringing me anywhere. So, is that what caused it? Potential, lots of different perspectives I could look at it. But there certainly was truth in that. So I had to make a decision. Things didn't look good for a minute. I always felt that I would be fine. I knew I would be fine. I don't know why I knew that. Well, I do know why. I just believed it in my heart that I would be fine. So when the doctors and when all of these people would talk to me, I was able to use what I already had learned and what I already knew. When they would come in and give me information that I did not agree with, I would just not let it resonate with me. I wouldn't let their reality interfere with mine now. So what this did for me was it gave me the ability to be really present and really conscious. And I had all of these other things that I thought that I felt I had to do were all just gone magically. I couldn't go to work even if I wanted. When I let that surrender happen, when I let that now happen, when I let life and the world work its magic around me, all of a sudden, again, things started to work out. And it was very confusing, but very good. But given that things didn't look good for a minute, I said, okay, I needed to make a decision. I have to move back to Ireland. In case I'm wrong, it would be a challenging situation for my daughter to move by herself as a 10-year-old to a country she'd never lived in, with people she didn't really know. I was like, I have to move now. So I did. Within 2 weeks, I was gone. Now, something that couldn't happen for 2 years previously happened in 2 weeks. Just like that. So I got back to Ireland. Things started to improve. My health started to improve. But my mindset had also improved. I'd simplified, I'd clarified, and I was more and more present. Because I wasn't trying to plan too far ahead. I wasn't trying to push anything away. I was just concentrating on what I needed to do and concentrating on what was in front of me at any moment in time. And through that whole process, again, the wheels of my life started to turn and started to move forward. Coming out of it, I realized, okay, I can't go back to the way I worked before. I can't come back to how things were. I kept on improving even though it didn't make any sense. I was off all treatments and I was still improving. Life was working its magic through me. And there were things I was doing on the side to help. But the same things, not all of them helped before. All of a sudden, life was moving through me again as I became more and more present. So now I found myself back in Ireland. And I'm trying to connect into Ireland. I'm trying to connect into the landscape. Because I knew her, right? If you recall, I found her in a field, right? So I was trying to connect back to that possibility that was here. After about a year of being here, I started to visit different places and different sites. I wanted to go to these places that were important in the landscape. And all of a sudden, I started to be able to get underneath the surface of Ireland, underneath the busyness. I started to go inland on the weekends when people were going to the beach because there's so many people. I started to find the quiet roads, the less traveled paths, to find that sense of peace where I could be uninterrupted. I started to work with a friend of mine who was a shaman because I wanted to be able to interpret the landscape on a different level. Now, this is a friend of mine who I'd worked with for over 20 years on and off. And so there was a period of time where I was going around to different sites. Started on St. Bridget's Day around February 1st of 2022. And I set seeds that day. I actually planted seeds and I set intentions of how I wanted my life to look forward, move forward, what I wanted to be doing, how I wanted to be showing up. And throughout that summer, I took the opportunities to visit different places on different days, different celestial events that were happening. I was like, you know what? It gives me something to do. And I like to do things. I think I've already described that. So it gave me a sense of purpose, right? So I'm going out and connecting to the land. I'm connecting to Ireland, to the earth, to the soil. I'm grounding myself. I'm grounding my energy. And I'm being really present in all of these places that I'm being in. So I was given this task by a friend of mine, my friend, the shaman. There's a period of time coming up in August of 2022. I don't recall exactly what it was. And I wanted to do something energetically. So I was talking to her on the phone and I was like, well, I think I need to go to this place. We discussed it. And she's like, yes, go to this place. And while you're there, I want you to imagine you're connecting Ireland to the pyramids, to the great pyramids in Egypt. And go with the intention of, I am seeding now as you go to these sites. And you get a few other different instructions that I was to fill out, but nothing complicated. So I set off on that journey in August. And I decided, okay, well, Ireland is a land of goddesses. And where I was going to was Uisneach, which is in the middle of the heart of Ireland, and Eru, where Ireland is named from, is the goddess that is supposedly buried in Uisneach. So I was like, okay, that's where I'm going to go first. But on my way there, of course, as I do, St. Bridget's Well was right next to it, and Bridget is the goddess of fire. And I was like, well, okay, I can go to St. Bridget's Well first. This is me adding on extra. I can go to St. Bridget's Well first on my way to Eru. So I went to St. Bridget's Well. And when I was there, I felt the energy. It was like, oh my God. I brought a couple of stones to leave at each place from my own collection. And when I dropped that one in the water, the energy changed. It was amazing. I wish I could recreate it for people. It was like, oh my God, this is actually a thing. So then I went from there, I went up to Uisneach, Finally made my way all the way to the cat stone, which is this huge, big stone. And there also the energy was really, really powerful. I continued my journey from there, and I'd been to the two goddesses. I was going to go to the Shannon River, and I went up to Binbalbin, which is a mountain on in Sligo. It's stunning, stunning, beautiful place. Recommend you visit it. And I'd come home, and this was over the course of 2 days. So it was the third day, and I was like, oh, you know what? Anya is in this area called Loch Gur. It's not that far from me. I said, really should. I'll go as a third triple. I did make this a triple goddess tour. My third day of this tour, I'm going to go visit the goddess Anya, who is in Loch Gur. So I went to Loch Gur, and it was beautiful there also as well. And I was on my way home from there. And of course, as I do, I was, okay, you know what? There's the largest stone circle in Ireland is very, very close to there. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go. It's called Grange Stone Circle. And my neighbor, actually, her family owned the land that is right next to this stone circle. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to the Grange Stone Circle on my way home, because there's actually two stone circles and a big stone. And I'm just going to go there, and I'm going to make that my last stop. And then I'm going to go home, and I'll have done this tour, my goddess tour. So when I arrived there was a lot of people, and, I was kind of just doing my own thing. And I was going to visit the smaller stone circle, and there's not a couple, but two ladies, and they asked me a question. Was there anything else they could do? And I said, well, you should probably go to Loch Gur. And they're like, oh, well, we can by bus. We have to leave in half an hour. And I was like, well, you might want to check out this small stone circle here. And then, and I sent them off into the field. Most people don't know about the second one. So then I was leaving. I was like, okay, I'm just going to go visit the tall standing stone that's in another field, which most people don't know about. And then I'll have done the three things, right? I was working with the numbers. I've done the triple, the Trinity, the two stone circles and the big stone. So I went off over to this other stone. I don't know. I just stood next to it. And I'm leaving, right? And as I'm leaving, the only two people are left are the two women that I spoke to very, very briefly. The about 10, 12 other people were all gone. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Here am I. There's just three of us left at the end of my day 3 of my triple goddess tour. I should just go at least, and I think I'm just going to go and talk to them. I didn't want to but there was that voice in my head saying, you should just go and talk to them. And I'm like, okay, I'll go and talk to them. I'll tell them about the other stone, which they have time to see. So I walked up to them and I said, I just wanted to say that I think it's really, really interesting that at the end of, I've been doing this triple goddess tour in Ireland, and I've been, doing my thing. I just want to say how interesting I think it is that there's 3 of us here. There's 3 women are at the end of triple goddess tour, and our face, one of the women, her face lit up, and she's like, oh, we're really interested in that. Tell us more. And I'm like, well, I don't really know a whole lot about it. I'm like, I'm just doing my thing. And I've been going around, and I've been connecting Ireland, seeding now, connecting Ireland to, before I said it to them, I was like, where are you from? And they said, we're from Egypt. And I was like, wow. So that's crazy. I said, I've been going around connecting Ireland, these places in Ireland, to the Great Pyramids, seeding now. And she said, I work next to the Great Pyramid. This is my daughter. She works in an island in the middle of the River Nile. I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. These people have traveled here by bus to a remote location. I'm in the middle of a stone circle at a random time, and I meet these people. She was a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher in Egypt, working next to the Great Pyramid. I'm like, oh my God. It's like there's this hand that moves through time. For us sometimes. And if we're just willing to be in a place and to be present, everything can happen. Things can turn on a dime. Things can change. And that is what this story is all about. It's showing you how being present and how to be in the now and how to be open and willing to listen to your nudges and your intuitions from inside of you, the genuine ones. Sometimes it's a little nagging voice. But how, if you do that, you can get into the flow of life in ways that you can't even possibly imagine. You couldn't make this stuff up, right? And in that, you leave open, all sorts of possibilities can open at any moment in time. So in that moment, the three of us were standing in the stone circle. We took a picture and we were like, this is incredible. We obviously, we have to be friends. We have to stay friends. And so we did, we exchanged information. And I continued on about my time. We stayed in contact. At another moment in time, then I'm like, listen, her name is Jacqueline. Jacqueline, you really, really need to make the most of being in Egypt. People like me like to travel there and do things like that. I think you should have a company that, that somebody like me can work with when I go to Egypt. And she said, I'd like to do that, but I want to do it with you. So I'm like, okay, so we can do that. Because in that moment, when she said that, I was like, okay, this is part of me working with that energy that presented at that moment in time, the possibility to create something more from that time. And I don't know how it's supposed to look. I don't know where we're going to go with it, but I know that it's divinely guided. I know that it was something intended to show possibilities of life and to bring people into these places, to be present in these places, to be present in any moment. But remember, being in the now and being here and now, it doesn't have to be in a fancy place. It can happen in the middle of a field. It can happen in your coffee shop. It can happen in anywhere in life where you're being willing to be present. It can happen in work where you just are willing to be more open and allow more of you to be there and to get out of the patterns of habit and break things up a little bit. Take a different route to work. Go shopping in a different store. Walk a different street. When it feels right to do so. Open up the doorway, the possibilities for things to show up. If it can happen for me, it can happen for anyone in all these different places and time. And that's really the beauty of it. I want to tell you one other story, and then that'll be it for now. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I had a midwife in New York, but I also had a midwife in Maine. My two midwives, to show you that synchronicity doesn't just happen for me. My two midwives met each other on the phone. One was in Brooklyn, Marcy. Chris was in Maine. They spoke on the phone maybe once or twice. Exchanged a few emails, said, hey, if ever you're in whatever, come visit. Chris had never been to New York. She was in Maine. She was traveling to New York with her husband, Jonathan. They were actually going through New York, as the roads sometimes take you. They were on their way down to Florida, I think it was, or Washington, D.C., I don't recall which. So they're driving through New York. It brings them, of course, through Manhattan. And they're on the Brooklyn Bridge. Jonathan's driving. Chris is sitting next to him. Chris, being observant, looks and sees a car. And this car is a station wagon. On traffic, 4 or 5 lane traffic, right? Not moving that fast. Chris sees a car and on it says, your hips are enough, or your hips are wide enough. Chris says to Jonathan, hey, there's a woman driving it. Chris says, on the bridge, Chris says, hey, Jonathan, roll down your window. I want to talk to her. So they're driving in slower traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge. Chris doesn't want to do it. He's like, I don't want to do that. And she's like, no. Chris is like, go ahead. Roll down the window. So he did. Chris rolls down the window. Marcy shouts across to the woman, leans forward, says across, are you a midwife? The woman nods. Says, yes, I am. Chris goes, are you Marcy? Marcy says, yes. Are you Chris? Chris says, yes. The two of them met in traffic, driving over the Brooklyn Bridge. What? Like, impossible. But it happened. So when you're willing to be aware of all of these potentials that are around you at any moment, but the only way you become aware of them is to become present. You have to get out of the mind so much and be in your body. You need to use your mind to think. But if you're using the mind just to process information that's already happened, it's going to close down your awareness. So when you're quite present and when you're open to see what's going on around you, and obviously you'll come in and out of being present because you're going to see something that's going to pull your attention, you're going to pull your attention back. When you're present, the world becomes the present. Anything can open up for you and anything can be possible. So I hope that we connect. I'd like to share more stories with you. I'd like to open up possibilities. I'd like to be present in your life if you're interested in coming into mine. My name is Ailish. You'll find me at ailish.com. That's AILISH.com. And I do hope that we connect. I look forward to seeing you and meeting you in your world. And I look forward to hearing your stories of being present and how that can expand your life. Because it's only by being present where you can really allow yourself to be in the flow and be in the promise of what can happen for you and allow it to deliver to you. I wish you well on your journey and thank you for being part of mine.
That's it for this episode. The next one is still in creation. Thanks for listening, and don't forget, if you want to support this podcast, share, subscribe, and leave stars, blue thumbs, and a review on whichever platform you listen to. If you want to be accompanied in the change processes that life offers you, if you want to live a goddess life daily and participate in the awakening of feminine energy in the world, know the secrets of witches, and apply the rituals of fairies in your daily life, contact me on my website, isayabelle.com. You can also subscribe to my newsletter to be informed of all the news in the real and virtual world of Isayabelle. You will, of course, find this podcast on all platforms: Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, etc., but also on YouTube and on my website, isayabelle.com, on the podcast page.